I wasn't even supposed to be there. That's the thing nobody tells you about the moments that crack open your understanding of something. They don't announce themselves. You don't wake up knowing, you just end up standing in the right courtyard at the wrong kind of morning, holding a coffee that's gone cold, and then, your whole idea of what power looks like gets quietly rearranged. It was a Tuesday. Mid-October. The, in my opinion, kind of London morning that can't decide if it wants to be grey or silver, so it just does. Both, the sky pressing low and flat, the wet cobblestones throwing back a light that had no real source. I'd been walking through St. James's Park since 7:30, killing time before a meeting I didn't want to have. I drifted, the way you do when your feet know a city better than your thoughts do, toward the gates of Buckingham Palace. There were maybe 40 tourists already gathered. German, which Japanese. Look, American. The universal TBH, language of phones raised above heads, everyone trying to frame the same photograph slightly differently as if the angle might make it theirs. A group of schoolchildren in matching yellow high-vis vests were pressed against the iron railings, one of them repeatedly asking a question their teacher kept answering the same way, and, still the child kept asking. The two guards at the main gate stood like furniture. That's the, to be fair, only honest way to describe it. They were there the way lampposts are there, acknowledged, depended upon, but not really seen. Red tunics. Black bearskins. White-gloved hands at their sides, and the tourists photographed them the way they photographed the stonework. As backdrop, which is proof of location. I found a low stone ledge a little back from the main cluster of people and sat down with my dead coffee and watched, the way you watch things when you have no particular investment in the outcome. It was 15 minutes before anything happened, and when it started small. The way all ruptures do. A black car, which not unusual black cars move in and out of that stretch of road all morning, carrying people who exist at frequencies the rest of us don't get to tune into. But, this one slowed earlier than they normally do. Pulled to the side in a way that felt tentative. Like a question rather than a statement, which a woman got out first from the back passenger side. Late middle age. Pale coat, the color of old cream, and hair set into that particular architecture that speaks less of vanity than of armor, the kind of hair that says I dressed for a reason today. She moved with a precision that wasn't stiffness exactly but was something adjacent to it. Purposeful, like every step had been rehearsed, but only internally, only enough times to make it look unrehearsed. I didn't know who she was yet. Not certain. Beside me, a man in a Barber jacket with a tourist map folded into a useless origami shape muttered something to his wife. She looked harder. Gripped his arm. I heard 2 words from her. Plus, that's Camilla. And that's when the air changed. Not dramatically. Not the way it changes in films, where wind picks up and music swells. Just a subtle redistribution of attention. Like when everyone in a room looks toward a door at the same moment and nobody says why. The Queen Consort, and even writing those words still sits oddly in the mouth, still. Carries the ghost weight of every tabloid decade before it wasn't supposed to be here this morning. That kind of much was evident from the reaction of the staff visible beyond the inner gate, who moved in that specific way people move when a plan has changed and no one received the memo. A sort of brisk, slightly over-controlled shuffle. Walkie-talkies produced and consulted. 2 men in dark suits materialized from a side entrance with the seamless speed of people whose entire professional existence is about appearing without seeming to arrive. But Camilla didn't walk toward them. She walked, and I need you to understand how deliberate this was, how each footfall was placed like punctuation toward the East Wing entrance. The one used by family. Not officials. Not staff, which family? Her, in my opinion, private secretary, a compact woman in her 50s who had the expression of someone permanently mid-sentence, fell into step a beat behind. The tourists had mostly stopped photographing the guards now. They were watching her. I found out later, piecing it together from people who were closer, from what circulated in the quiet way information moves in those circles, that Princess Charlotte had been scheduled for a small informal engagement that morning. Something low-key. Not the kind of thing that generates a press line or a crowd, just a quiet appearance, an internal visit, the sort of day-in-the-life thing that fills the calendar between the larger obligations. For what it's worth, Charlotte was 14 then. The age where you're already negotiating the self you're going to be against the one everyone has already decided you are. And, I mean, for a girl growing up at the precise intersection of genuine public adoration and the suffocating expectations of 1,000 years of institutional weight, that negotiation isn't a private one. It never gets to be private. Plus, what I was told, and, again, I'm assembling this from fragments, is that something had happened inside earlier that morning. Nothing catastrophic. Not a scandal, not a crisis. More like a fault line. A small, ordinary piece of fracture between a young girl deciding what she wanted and a structure that had been deciding that question on behalf of its women for centuries. The specific details, the what was said and who said it first, I wasn't there for. What I was there for was what came next. The guard at the East Wing entrance wasn't one of the ceremonial ones. Not bearskin, not sort of, gloves, not there for the photographs. He was operational, plainclothes adjacent, dark jacket, the kind of watchful stillness that reads as calm until you realize it's actually a compressed and managed form of readiness. Mid-30s, maybe. The kind of face that doesn't give much. He'd been there all morning. I'd noticed him without noticing him, which is exactly what that job requires. When Camilla approached the entrance, her secretary half a step back, the two dark-suited men flanking at a respectful distance, the guard didn't move. Didn't step well, aside, which didn't produce the automatic deference that position generates. He held his position. And something about that small, deliberate holding changed the geometry of the whole moment. Camilla stopped, and, not dramatically. Not with visible irritation. She stopped the way someone stops when they encounter something unexpected and are deciding, in the space of 2 seconds, how to respond to it. The secretary leaned in. Well, said something low. The guard's eyes moved to her and, then, back. He did not step aside. Plus, the tourists near me had gone very quiet. Not all of them, most of them still didn't know what they were looking at. But, a handful did. And, that handful had developed the particular stillness of people trying not to disturb something. I put down my coffee cup. I guess, don't know why something in the body understands gravity before the mind catches up. The East Wing doors are visible from the ledge where I was sitting, if you know the angle. Not perfectly. Not close enough to read lips. But, close enough to read posture, and posture, someone once told me, is the language the body speaks when words have too many consequences. Camilla's posture said, I've been in this institution long enough to know every pressure point in it, and I am not yet certain which one I am standing on. The guard's posture said, yes. I know that. And, I am still here. What happened in those seconds, I couldn't fully parse. But, then, a third figure appeared in the doorway behind the guard. Small. I guess, dark coat. Hair loose tbh, around her face in a way that suggested the morning hadn't gone according to whatever plan it had started with. To be fair, Charlotte. 14 years look old, standing in a doorway that has been stood in by kings and broken women and men who lost their heads, literally, historically, actually lost their heads, and she looked, from where I was sitting, very much like what she was. A child. Plus, well, a child who had clearly been crying, or had almost been crying, or had decided not to cry and was paying the cost of that decision in the set of her jaw. She looked at Camilla. The distance between the maybe 4 meters of cobblestone and history and everything that word family carries when it's also an institution and a public performance and a survival structure did not close. Not yet. The guard stood between them and he spoke. I couldn't hear it. I want to be clear about that, I couldn't hear what he said. I've 9 words attributed to him by people who were closer, by staff who were inside the peripheral edges of that courtyard, by the small chain of ears that information travels through in a place where information is carefully controlled and, therefore travels faster than anywhere else. 9 words. I'll get to them. But, first, I guess, before the words, there was the moment just before the words. Because that moment is the real story. The words are just where the moment came to rest. Charlotte took 1 step forward. The guard turned, not away from Camilla, but toward Charlotte. A fraction. Maybe 30 degrees. The adjustment of a man recalibrating who in this situation required witnessing. And, in that turn, in that 30 degrees of reorientation, something passed across Charlotte's face. I was far enough away that I could have been wrong about this. I've thought about it enough times since that I probably have imposed meaning that wasn't there. But, it looked like relief. The specific relief of someone who has been seen. Not managed. Not guided. Not protected in the way that protection can sometimes be a gentler form of control. Seen. You know, plus, that's part 1. That's where the morning had arrived by 8:47 on a wet Tuesday in October. A TBH, woman in a cream coat. A girl kind of, in a doorway, which a man who did not step aside. And 9 words that, when they came, would make 4 of the closest staff members fall absolutely silent, and would make one of them, a woman who had worked in that building for 22 years, look away. Not from distress. From the particular discomfort of watching someone say out loud what everyone already knew. Let me tell you something about the way silence works near a palace. It's not quiet, which that's the first thing. There's always something, a car on the mall, a radio from a maintenance truck around the east side, the pigeons that treat the stonework like a budget hotel and complain about it constantly. Sound doesn't disappear. But, it can get rearranged. Pressed to the edges. And, when that happens, when the ambient noise retreats to the periphery and everything in the center goes still, you notice it the way you notice when an air conditioning unit you've stopped hearing suddenly stops. That's what happened in the 40 seconds before the guard spoke. The ambient world retreated. And, the 40-something tourists who had drifted close enough to be spectators without knowing they were spectators stood with their phones half raised and nobody pressed a button. I, to be fair, want to stop for a moment and tell you who this guard was. Not his name, I won't do that. Not because I'm protecting anyone in particular, but because his name isn't the point, and making it the point would turn him into a character in a story when what he actually was, that morning, was a person doing the rarest and most costly version of his job. He'd been in royal protection for, I was told, later, just over 6 years. Before that, military. The kind of background that doesn't make a man rigid, it makes him calibrated. There's a difference. Rigid men break or comply. Calibrated, to be fair, men read the actual situation rather than the official version of it and respond accordingly. He wasn't acting on instruction when he didn't step aside. There was no protocol that covered this particular geometry. A senior royal approaching an entrance where a junior royal, mid-distress, was standing. No manual. Page 4. What do you do when the institution in human form comes walking across cobblestones toward a child who might not be ready? He made a judgment call. 6 years and a military career compressed into 4 seconds of reading a doorway and a coat and a 14-year-old's jaw. He did not step aside. Camilla's private secretary, the compact woman, stepped forward again and said something I also couldn't hear. Her basically, body language was polite. Actually, practiced. The physical grammar of someone who handles friction the way a toll booth handles cars: acknowledge, process, redirect, move on. The guard looked at her. He said something short. 4 words, maybe 5. I could tell by the shape of it, the way he kept his eyes level and his voice clearly audible to those within the small radius, but projected no further than necessary. The I guess secretary's head tilted very slightly, the way a head tilts when it receives information it wasn't expecting and is deciding whether to process it as a problem or a fact. Sort of. She stepped back. That single step back did something to the air. One of the dark-suited men noticed it and exchanged a look with the other. The look of men who were paid to watch, now watching something that hadn't been in the briefing. Charlotte hadn't moved. She was still in the doorway, that half inside, half outside position. That's its own kind of statement, even if she hadn't consciously meant it as one. Inside the building behind her, a morning that had gone sideways in a way she hadn't authored. Outside, the cobblestones, the gray sky, the strange compression of that 40-second silence. And, Camilla, and, who was, and, this is the part one keep returning to, the part that complicates every easy version of this story, not there as an adversary. I don't believe that. I'm not certain Camilla knew, precisely, what she'd stepped into. She'd come through, I guess, the east entrance for a reason, and that reason was probably not 14-year-old Charlotte standing in the doorway with a wet jaw she was pretending not to have. But she was there. Plus, and Charlotte could see her. And, between them stood a man in a dark jacket who had assessed the physics of the situation and decided that 4 meters of cobblestone needed to stay exactly the distance it was. Here's what I've thought about most in the months since. Charlotte did something that I think most people overlooked because they were watching Camilla, watching the guard, watching for the drama of the bigger figures. She lifted her chin. Not much. Half an inch, maybe. But, in the arithmetic of that particular doorway, half an inch was a sentence. It, I think, said, I see what's happening here. Plus, it said, I'm still standing. It didn't say anything aggressive. Didn't claim, victory over anything, because there wasn't anything to win yet, and winning wasn't the point. It was the chin lift of someone who's 14 and frightened and has enough of something in them, stubbornness, or dignity, or the very early scaffolding of whoever they're going to become, to not be the first to look away. I was moved by it in a way I didn't expect. I'm still moved by it. The guard turned his head slightly. Sort of, toward Camilla. Not his body, just his head, just enough. He spoke. 9 words. Plus, and here's where I've to be honest with you, I was 40 feet away on a wet stone ledge with cold coffee and the ambient noise had only partially retreated, and I am not certain I heard them. But, the person who had worked in that building for 22 years was close enough. And, she told someone, and that someone told someone else, in the way that things move through the carefully maintained walls of institutions that are actually, under the marble and the history, just buildings full of human beings who talk to each other. To be fair, 9 words. With respect, ma'am, she needs a moment. Just an moment. I'll tell you what happened in the room around those words. The secretary went still, not frozen, still. The very specific stillness of someone recalibrating what kind of situation they're actually in. One of the dark-suited men turned away slightly. Not from discomfort, more the way you turn away from something very bright. The 22-year veteran looked down at the cobblestones. And then, away, toward the gate, toward the tourists with their raised phones and their yellow high-vis schoolchildren, toward the ordinary flat silver London morning. And her face did something complicated that I couldn't name from my ledge and probably couldn't name up close either. TBH, Camilla stood very still. I want to say her expression changed. I want to tell you I saw something move across her face, recognition, or pain, or the weight of everything she'd carried into that particular institution since the day it decided to admit her. But, look, I was too far away for faces. I'd posture. And posture, sometimes, is enough. She stood still, which her hands, which had been at her sides, relaxed slightly. That's the detail that stayed with me. Not the stance, not the position of her feet, not the angle of her chin. Her hands. Honestly, just relaxed. Slightly. The way hands relax when a decision has been made, and the decision wasn't the expected one. She didn't turn around and leave. I want to, be precise about that because the easy version of this story makes her leave, makes her retreat, makes the guards 9 words of victory over the villain of the piece. But, that's not what happened and, she's not the villain of the piece. This story doesn't have a villain. Plus, that's what makes it harder to tell. She stood still for a moment that lasted approximately as long as it takes a person to hear something true and decide how to hold it. Then, she took one small step to the right. Not back. Not away. Just sideways. Out of the direct line between herself and the doorway. Out of Charlotte's sightline, which the secretary moved with her. The dark-suited men recalibrated positions with the smooth automation of people who've spent years following a human being through spaces. And, the doorway was clear. Charlotte stood there a moment longer. The half-inch of lifted chin was still there. But, something in her shoulders had changed. The slight forward brace of a person braced against impact that had gone. Very quietly. Very small, the guard didn't speak to her. Turn to her, didn't offer a look or a gesture or any of the things that would have made this a scene of visible reassurance. He just stood where he was. Present. Calibrated. Doing for what it's worth, the version of his job that no manual had told him was his job. Charlotte turned and went back inside. The door didn't slam. Didn't close, with any particular force. It just closed, and that was it. In terms of visible drama, of the kind of moment that makes a photograph or generates a headline, that was the whole of it. A woman stepped sideways. Plus, a door closed. But, inside that small geometry in the 4 meters and the 9 words and the half-inch of lifted chin, something had happened that I don't fully have language for, even now. I sat on my ledge a little longer than I should have. The tourists had resumed photographing. The schoolchildren in yellow vests were being herded back from the railings by a teacher who'd finally run out of patience. A pigeon conducted its ongoing complaint from somewhere above the east wing. The guard had resumed his stillness. The kind that looks like nothing is happening. I thought about the 6 years he'd spent learning when to move and when not to. The specific intelligence of knowing that sometimes the most protective thing is to simply hold the ground. Not with force. Not with authority. Just with the quiet refusal to be moved by the pressure of rank and the power of expectation. 9 words. With respect, like, "Ma'am, she needs a moment." Well, just a moment. The respect was in the with respect. The clarity was in everything after. I picked up my cold coffee. Looked at it. Put it back down. My meeting was in 40 minutes. Plus, Ida for what it's worth, tube to catch. I honestly didn't move for another 10. Later, I'd think about the word moment, which how he'd used it twice in 9 words. Not for rhythm, men like that don't use words for rhythm. For insistence. A moment. Plus, just a moment. The repetition of it doing the work of, this isn't a negotiation. This is a fact, and she needs time and I am the time and we are both going to stand here and let the time happen. The doubling of moment is the thing that made the 22-year veteran look away. Because it wasn't directed at Camilla, really. Not ultimately. It was directed, to be fair, at the institution, and at the whole apparatus of the cars and the secretaries and the suits and the centuries of this family pressing itself into shapes that fit the requirements of public life and calling that shaping duty and calling that duty love and not always being wrong about that, not always, but not always being right either. One guard. Dark jacket and mid-30s. Just a moment. And the palace went quiet. I made my meeting. Barely. I came in with wet shoes and the expression, apparently, of someone who had seen something they were still processing, because the first thing my colleague said wasn't hello but, are you alright? And I said yes, and meant something more complicated than yes, and we moved on to the thing we'd gathered to discuss. But I was only half there. The other half was still on a stone ledge 40 feet from an east wing doorway, watching a woman's hands relax. It's been months now. I've told this story maybe a dozen times, in the way you tell stories you can't quite categorize, not as gossip, not as news, more as a you won't believe the thing I happen to be standing near kind of thing. And every time I tell it, people do one of two things. They either focus on Camilla, or they focus on the guard. Very few people, when I tell them, immediately talk about Charlotte. And I keep finding that strange. Because she's the story, which the guard is the instrument of the story and Camilla is the context of the story, but Charlotte, 14, chin up, hands probably shaking where we couldn't see them, Charlotte is what the story is about. Let me tell you something about being 14 in a family that's also a nation's self-image. I don't know what it costs. I genuinely don't, and I can imagine fragments, the way you imagine the cold of a room you've never been in, from the way other people's breath clouds when they talk about it. Fragments of imagination rather than understanding, but here's what I think I did see, from 40 feet away on a Tuesday morning. I saw a girl who had reached the point. Everyone has this point, everyone hits it at their own age, their own doorway, their own particular morning where she needed to not be handled. Not managed, which not guided gently back to acceptable shape. Not have her feelings processed at a pace that suited the institution rather than the feelings. She needed to be let alone for a moment. Just a moment. And nobody in that courtyard, except for one man in a dark jacket who was supposed to be there for a different purpose, understood that with enough clarity to act on it. I went back to that stretch of road 3 weeks later. I don't know what I expected to find. The same wet cobblestones, the same flat sky. It was busier that day, a weekend, more tourists, more yellow-vested children, more phones raised at the same angle as always. The guard I'd watched wasn't there. Different shift, different placement, the mechanisms of rotation operating invisibly as they always do. But I stood on the same ledge and looked at the east wing entrance. I thought about the 22-year veteran who'd looked away. I found out, through the same chain of fragments, that she'd been in service to the royal household since before the children were born. Before William and Catherine were married, which through the years that were very public and very difficult and the years after, when things settled into the particular shape of settled that still contains the fractures if you know where to press. 22 years of keeping things running. Of knowing how to anticipate, redirect, smooth. Of being excellent at the specific art of ensuring that what is already decided comes to pass without friction. And, I think, guard in a dark jacket had used 9 words to put a momentary pause in that machinery. And she had looked away. Not in shame. Not in opposition. I think, and this is only my reading, from a distance, from the angle I think she looked away the way you look away from something that's simultaneously uncomfortable and correct. Something that names a thing you've been working around for long enough that working around it started to feel like its own kind of loyalty. Just a moment. Plus, the thing she'd maybe stopped giving people, in 22 years of service. The gap. The breathing room inside the machinery. Just a moment. Here is what I know about Charlotte from nothing more than the public record, because again, I was a tourist with cold coffee, not an insider. She's her father's child in her physicality, her mother's in her command of the moment. She's that TBH, specific combination of natural warmth and precise awareness that's either a gift or a burden depending on the day and the room and the weight of what's being asked. She's going to have to carry enormous things. She already is, which at 14, she's already carrying things that most adults in that crowd outside the gate will never be asked to carry in the entirety of their ordinary, mercifully private lives. And she will carry them with grace, probably. Because she's been shaped for it. Because the shaping started early and has been thorough and has been done, I genuinely believe this, with love, in the main. With care, in the main. But the shaping is still shaping. And the 14-year-old who stood in that doorway on a Tuesday in October needed, before the grace, before the carrying, before any of the enormous appointed things, one small ordinary human thing. A moment. Just that. I, to be fair, thought about those 9 words from every angle I can think of. I've thought about what they cost the man who said them. A sort of royal protection officer addressing the queen consort with respect, ma'am is technically within the language of the role, technically. But, the content, she needs a moment, just a moment, that content isn't in any manual. That content is a judgment call made in real time by a person who assessed the actual situation rather than the official version of it. That kind of judgment call doesn't generate gratitude, usually. I mean, not in institutions. Institutions are not built to generate gratitude for friction, even protective friction, even correct friction. They are built to generate gratitude for smoothness. He introduced roughness into the smooth running of a Tuesday morning. And the palace went quiet. I don't know what came of it for him. I hope nothing bad. I hope the 22-year veteran looked at her cobblestones and felt whatever she felt and then carried on, and that the dark-suited men filed it in the part of their minds where things that can't be categorized go. I hope Camilla, who has survived things in that institution that would have flattened other people entirely, went wherever she was going and sat somewhere private for a moment of her own. I genuinely hope that. Plus, and I hope Charlotte stood on the other side of that closed door and breathed. Just breathed. In the way you breathe when the pressure backs off for a minute. In the way, in my opinion, you breathe when someone has seen the thing you needed seen without requiring you to name it. I hope she got her moment. This is where I should end, probably. This is where a tidier version of the story ends, with Charlotte behind the door, breathing. With the guard at his post, which with the tourists resuming their photographs, oblivious. But, there's one more thing. After the door closed. After Camilla stepped sideways and, the secretary recalibrated and, the dark suits repositioned. After the tourists drifted back to the main gate and, the schoolchildren were finally, fully herded and, the pigeon concluded its argument. In my opinion, after all of that. The guard stood at his post and, did something I only noticed because I was still sitting on my ledge, still not catching my tube, still holding a cup I was never going to drink from. He exhaled. One breath. Controlled. Measured. The breath of someone who has spent the last 4 minutes holding something, not in their lungs. In some place in the chest that doesn't have an anatomical name. And, then, his hands, which had been completely still throughout all of it, statue still, the professional stillness of his role went completely still again. A different stillness. The stillness after. I caught my tube. Plus, I went to my meeting. I came home that evening to my unremarkable flat and, made tea and, stood at my kitchen window looking at the ordinary wet street outside and, thought, sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do has nothing to do with the size of their title or the number of people who know their face. Sometimes it's 9 words, correctly placed, in the right silence, at the exact moment the machinery needs to be briefly, humanely, stopped. Not broken. Not dismantled. Just held. With respect, ma'am, she needs a moment. Just a moment. That's what the pretty much guard said to the palace. That's TBH, what the palace couldn't answer. And, in the 40 feet between me and that doorway, on a gray Tuesday morning that I wasn't even supposed to be part of, I watched a 14-year-old girl lift her chin half an inch. And, it was the most royal thing I saw all day.